I know Scott from my days as the fire chief in San Diego. Scott was a city councilman at the time. In fact, he was a sitting councilman when I was hired, and got to know him through my work in San Diego.
I've known Scott for about 15 years, I would say, and I first met him when I was doing environmental advocacy in San Diego, and he was an advisor.
Well, I knew Scott for years because of his work in the environmental community, and I had met him and his wife through my service on the Planned Parenthood board.
I think it's Scott's ability to work with other people. He's got the temperament and the character.
The word that I think of when I think of Scott is thoughtful and accessible.
There's something about his demeanor, the way he can bring people together, his ability to speak to just about anyone that really allowed us to get deals done and allowed us to get to where we needed to get for workers.
During the time following the first big fire we had in San Diego and some of the financial issues that were plaguing the city at the time, led the city council and the city manager to have difficulty funding all of the projects that I identified that needed to be fixed.
There was a meeting that was held at the La Jolla Rec Center about 12 years ago, and I will never forget it because it was just packed with people that were extremely passionate on every side.
When I first came to the Labor Council, I was serving as our political director, and one of my first tasks was to ask Scott Peters, who was then the council president, to docket an ordinance that would ban supercenters in San Diego.
And Scott took it upon himself to make that project happen.
Scott stood in front of the crowd. He didn't sit down in a chair. He got in front of the table.
He invited me to breakfast, and we sat down at a little place in La Jolla.
He put a group together, got it funded, was able to make the fire station improvements that were required, and actually updated that station to become a fairly modern fire station.
He addressed each and every comment skillfully and patiently, and somehow, you know, we all left feeling like Scott heard us.
And I must have talked for 5 minutes straight without even taking a breath, you know, on. And finally Scott just stopped me and he said, okay, I want to tell you, I'm with you. And I was so shocked. I had a cup of coffee in my hand and I spilled it all over the table and all over Scott. He now says it's the only time he's been burned by labor.
He was very cool and calm under fire, particularly the big firestorm that we had. Scott was in the command center with me and showed all of the same signs of leadership that he showed in weekly council meetings or in private meetings.
It's just a monumental task to try to get something like a community plan adopted in a community like La Jolla. And without Scott's leadership, I just don't think there's any way it would have been done.
It's not just having somebody who's going to vote with you, who's going to get up and say a fiery speech and talk about how much they're with you, but somebody who has the skill set and the ability, really the temperament to get things done. And that's what Scott Peters has meant for our workers, for our unions, and for, I think, most middle-class families in San Diego.
I support Scott Peters for Congress.
I support Scott Peters for Congress.
I proudly support Scott Peters for Congress.